Adjourned. So, all right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, May 11th, Town of Scarborough Ordinance Committee meeting. Call this meeting to order at 4:05 p.m. For the record, Jean Marie is on her way. She should be here shortly. Roll call. April Sizer.
Here.
Nick McGee. Here. Jean Marie on her way. I show we have quorum. Next item is the approval of the minutes from the April 13th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, any discussion?
Thank you.
All in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you. We're going to make a slight change to the agenda today. We're going to flip-flop the marijuana discussion and the LD 2003 discussion. For purposes, we know there's some interested parties here for the marijuana stuff, and sure you would. The 2003 information is very meaty, very interesting, but you might not want to sit through all of it. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to move item 5 and item 4, swapping more out.
So moved.
And second, all in favor? All right, next item. Discussion on the possible action of proposed amendments of chapter 1018 marijuana establishment licensing ordinance. Liam, would you like to give us a primer on this?
Sure. So the proposed amendments in your packet, many of them with regard to odor mitigation and odor enforcement are items that had a good deal of discussion through a staff-led working group over the last few months. I wouldn't say that there's total agreement on all the components of it. There is some complexity to these items. In addition to those two large items, there's also a number of other changes that are a range of significance, from just updating the ordinance to reflect cannabis, which is how state law now refers to this industry, as well as some changes to security based on staff's experience. There's also proposed changes in fees, which I expect will get some more discussion, but wanted to certainly put a placeholder in there. But this is a pretty complicated issue that's been in Scarborough now for beyond just the ordinance of 3 years. It's complicated, it's complex, but we thought it was time to really bring forward some of these changes and get the council involved in the conversation. So certainly not a finished product, but I think some good starting points for discussion among this committee and with residents moving forward.
Thank you, Liam. For anyone here in the public that'd like to comment on the topic of the marijuana issue, please approach the podium and try to keep you to 3 minutes if you'd like to speak on it.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Joanna Russell. I'm a resident of South Portland at 87 Chase Street and a hopeful marijuana or cannabis manufacturing applicant to the town of Scarborough. I did review the changes being proposed, and although a lot of it has to do with odor mitigation and cultivation, I know absolutely nothing about that. So I defer any conversation about that. My feedback is specific to 3 points. Section 6, the fees. Although I think it's a fabulous step in the right direction, I point out that the fees for somebody like myself would still be close to $2,000 annually. Sorry. The medical licensing application fee is $350, the adult use $350, $220 for food handlers, $500 for the first medical license, $250 for the second license. When you add all of that up and there's no difference between the two licenses, I'm not quite sure why there has to be 2 separate fees at all. There's absolutely no difference in the inspection process or the requirements for security or any other measure for that matter. I would propose that it potentially graduates down the longer an applicant holds a license, because generally the inspection needs are going to be higher in that first year. The second point I wanted to make was about section 10, number 6B. This may have something to do with mimicking some state rules. But it specifically mentions having a separate room that is locked within a facility to hold material. And the facility is already a locked and secure location. So it's essentially asking for another locked room within a facility that's already locked and secure. And so I just don't know that that's a necessary measure, and wanted to bring it up for discussion now. The third and final piece that I noticed was section 10, number 7. The last sentence says with increased probability to emit odors. So there has been some discussion about specifically an edible kitchen or a small scale facility, maybe not having such a concern for odor emissions, but this doesn't really delineate who has a high probability or a low probability. And it might be nice to have that spelt out in the ordinance. And if they're initially declared a low probability, like what would happen to change that? Specifically, my concern then follows down to the same section, but letters E and F, where the windows have to be closed, which actually I don't have a problem with, but specifically air conditioning, because it's a teeny tiny little space in an air conditioner, I think is pretty reasonable for low odor emitting facilities. That was all I had. If you have any questions, I'm not sure if you do that.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Dave Rabideau, 10 Bickford Street, Scarborough. Just some real high level comments. I want to thank the working group that and Liam's direction that's worked on this, the ordinance for quite a while. It's been a serious commitment, and people have taken the time and they're doing the best they can. I think we're almost there. I think there's some comments recently that were suggested and maybe should be looked at. And I can't speak for everybody. From my perspective, the enforcement piece of this needs a lot of work. It's there's a lot of numbers going on there. There's a lot of different people involved. There's a lot of time frame that's going on. So what happens one day might not necessarily be the same the next day. So when people are responding 48 hours later to basically verify that something existed 2 days ago, could be challenging. It might be there. It might not be. The wind changes, things change. I realize there has to be some validation to all of this, which I didn't take very well when that was first submitted, because I think we've been going through this a long time, and it kind of puts a stain on the residents when we say that their thoughts and findings need to be validated. But I understand from a legal perspective that has to be done. I just think it needs a lot more work. So we need to spend a lot more time with that piece of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, Darlene Smith, 10 Bickford Street. Just a few little critiques from regarding the red line items of this ordinance. The cultivation fees was the first thing that kind of struck me, because I did a real quick search at like Saco and Portland and other communities. And I think we need to be cautious not to be below them. For instance, we're taking a 2-tier 501 to 2,000 square foot canopy from suggesting dropping it from 3,000 to 1,500, where Portland charges 5,000. So obviously, if you can get the same, if you can rent an apartment for 5,000 in Portland, but for 1,500 in Scarborough, you're going to come to Scarborough. So that's a concern. Again, the word reasonable has been added to 10-7 regarding that an owner or a lessee should make every reasonable, to make reasonable changes necessary. is very subjective, what I consider reasonable and what an owner considers reasonable. In 10-7A, this is different from the original ordinance. The rooms are actually listed rather than just saying any place that odor could be an issue. Leaving it up to the tenants and the owners to make that determination where odors are. And the carbon filters are still an issue. 10-7B, we removed, but not less than on an annual basis. So that has been removed from the original ordinance. Now leaving it up to manufacturers, and some manufacturers actually don't identify. They just say until it stops working. So I think it needs to be at the very least on an annual basis that the carbon filters have to be changed. On 11, there's a 500-foot restriction for 500-foot abutters are the only ones allowed to contact to make a complaint, which I think is disappointing. I think every resident in Scarborough should be heard and has an opportunity, whether you're within 500 feet or 1,000 feet. So, and the enforcement piece that has been added, I know there's been a lot of work put into that. To me, it's just extremely complicated. 3 households within 2 days and 7 contacts, and then the whole timelines. When we were discussing it in the work group, when I made on May 1st, made a phone call, it could take till October 26th for that to be mitigated and, to completely be closed and done. And I think that's just too long of a timeline. So just some suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Allison Bristol, 6 Bayview Avenue. And first, I want to thank the council members for including me on the working group. I'm not a resident of Holly Street or Bickford Street, but have had a particular interest in this topic. And it's always good to have an opportunity to sit in a room with people that you have different points of view on and try to come to a consensus. I don't think that we've quite arrived at a consensus with what's been put forward. And also, I just want to be clear that the comments that I make are in all due respect for everyone involved, and people have different vested interests in this topic. And I greatly appreciate all the time and effort everybody on the working group have put in. My first comment is, I said this in the last meeting and I'll say it again. I think it's a conflict of interest to have had John Burke, who's contributed to this group greatly, draft the ordinance, or if it's not a conflict of interest, it's just bad form or bad optics. And it's been made clear that John has participated in the working group as a citizen, not a legal representative, and he has contributed a lot, which to me is even more reason why it was inappropriate for him to draft the ordinance and or the enforcement language. In section 6, with amended licensing fees, when the ordinance was first adopted, I don't believe the intent in setting the licensing fees by tier was strictly about covering municipal costs associated with the licensing process. There's no state revenue sharing here from what I understand. So if all we are doing is covering processing costs, and what's the benefit to the town and taxpayer? What benefits to the town and the taxpayers derive from opting into cannabis licensing at all? If anything, this fee structure will encourage larger cultivation establishments, particularly in the PPO and elsewhere. Section 10A7, performance standards. At the April working group meeting, when Liam proposed having a new ordinance language, and I have to thank Liam also for his time and efforts and his leadership at the meetings. But when he proposed having a new ordinance language and enforcement guidelines drafted, I expressed concern that the town would be moving the goalposts for the residents. And this is exactly what this proposed section 7 does. The current ordinance requires that cannabis establishments have odor mitigation systems to ensure the smell is not detectable, not light, not strong, but it's not detectable beyond the property boundary, period. And the current ordinance puts the onus of making sure this standard is met on licensees and property owners, period. The new language modifies and qualifies the performance standard as being subject to arduous enforcement processes outlined in Section 11, odor observation and enforcement, which begins with, and this is, from the section, the standard of proof necessary to verify a complaint is a preponderance of the evidence. I've never seen language like this in any ordinance. We are not trying a civil law case here. So are we saying that if enough households don't present the most convincing evidence over a 7-day period, and the town doesn't agree, odor complaints are more than likely true 48 hours later, and over the next 5 days, residents' complaints are invalid, and 14 days later, an order panel is assembled to give identified licensees 3 months and a landlord of an identified licensee 4 months, plus extensions to remedy. And if remedied, if complaints persist, the license and or property performance standards can be modified to include yet additional standards to accommodate licensees and property owners. Meanwhile, what about residents who can't enjoy the comfort of their own properties? It's really ridiculous. This section only requires establishments and property owners to take any and all reasonable, as Darlene said, measures to meet performance standards, which is totally subjective. It also occurs to me that these proposed amendments are yet one more example of the town rewriting an ordinance to accommodate one property owner, and in this case, their tenants, versus taking action for the good of the community. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are other licensed cultivation facilities elsewhere in Scarborough that do not present the same persistent odor problems. With all due respect to Shelley and her lessees, I hope the town will work as hard as it has to accommodate the cannabis industry and do right by the residents who have had to endure this situation for far too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Any other?
Henry Pelletier, 10 Snow Canning Road, Scarborough. I'd just like to give you a little bit of background on the building because I'm the guy that bought it. And how I got to get to Scarborough was through Harvey Rosenfeld. He was in charge of Sedco. And him and some counselors spent a lot of time with me. And we were looking at 3 buildings, Herman Shoe, St. Johnsbury, and the Snows building. I would just like to say that when we took the building over, it was ready for condemnation. And the Snow Company, not Fred Snow, but the people that bought them, they were willing to just about give the building away. I was willing to accept all the things that goes with it. Well, I ended up buying it. It took me a year to buy it. Took me a year to get financing. And I'd just like to say, when I bought the building in 1995, that year's the year we had a flood down there. So you can imagine money was tight on me then and what it got when we had a flood. So anyway, we survived that. And we were paying $6,000 in taxes. Today, that building pays $30,000 worth of taxes. I don't know how many other people the taxes went up that high. But we went from 6,000 to where we are today at 30,000. Plus, we got 14 growers in there. And every time a grower comes in, he leases 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. And then he tears the whole thing apart and builds so he can grow pot. Well, one guy just got one of the companies, number 28, just finished his, And he put in $600,000 for 4,000 square feet. So you can see that the pot business today, why it's having a hard time. Because the money has gone way down on how much you can sell pot for. And today he's trying to sell it for $200,000 and can't even get anybody to look at it. So it kind of tells you which way pot is going. Hopefully it comes back to where it's reasonable and people can make money. Myself personally never smoked it, never sold any. All I do is own a building. So I'd just like to say that as far as the building is concerned to the town of Scarborough, we never call the fire department unless there's a fire. When or something went off that wasn't supposed to. We don't call them because the street ain't fixed up, but we never bother anybody. And here we are today with all this money tied up in there, and some of these growers want to get out of it, and they can't even get anywhere as close to the money they have put into it. So I think it's very unfair. Something ain't right there. And it seems to me from the phone call, because I have a space in my office just for that the people that do call, it seems like it's always the same people that call the town that complains that they're getting an odor. Well, I'll tell you what, when we had urchin people down there, I had 7 urchin people. Today there's only 1. And when we had 7 urchin people, that place stunk so bad, we had to shut them in the summertime, or in the time when it was shipping, we had to shut them down because it was causing too much of an odor. And the odor you have today, I know there is an odor. There's no question about it. I don't question that. And these people that own these places spent, I know how much my daughter has spent. She spent thousands of dollars on odor so far, and still getting just as many complaints today as we did 6 months ago. So, I mean, I don't know what you expect. A place that knew what we were going to do there. We weren't going to change anything. We just seemed that all of a sudden, these people are getting nervous because they can't even get their money back, and they're losing money selling pot because they can't get enough money for their pot. And I'd just like to tell you that, like I say, we paid $6,000 in 1995. And today, my last bill was $30,000 for real estate. So, I mean, if you people are in business and you think you can, I rented a garage back in 1995. The guy is still there today, a guy named Marcotte out of Auburn, Maine. I rented that garage for $500 back in 1995, $500 a month. And today, his rent is $500 a month. So I don't know what more I can do on my end to keep this thing going. But I know the way, every time there's a meeting or something like this, and it's about pot, it always comes back to 10 Snow Canning Road. That's all I got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pelter. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi, Shelley Pelletier, 10 and 20 Snow Canning Road. So first, I'd like to give you a breakdown on the money that we have spent to date on controlling the odor. For the cost to date in 2023, so far, we've spent $20,079.12. I can break it down for you for a little bit. We are now investing in what we call Owner Pro Gel 5-gallon jugs. What it is it's an odor neutralizing agent that was used in slaughterhouses and other big factories to control odor. We've bought 9 gallons so far. That includes our backup and what we've used. That cost us a little over $1,200. To get for these 5-gallon pails. We have to get a certain fan to fit on them so that they can disperse the air. We bought 5 of those because we placed these 5-gallon pails in 5 different sections of the building. That cost us about $500. For the labor and material to cover the existing holes that we have found so far, we spent $5,315. There are still 2 holes that we have to cover. The filters for our rooms, and I'm just talking about the grow space that we have. I'm not talking about the other tenants. This is just our grow space. The filters for our rooms cost us about $660. These aren't carbon filters. These are just filters for our AC system because we have RTUs. So we normally will change them every cycle. Every cycle is 9 weeks. We have 5 cycles a year. Now, because we've actually looked into it, and we've really paying attention to what's going on, or I should say what's happening in the rooms and how the smell is being dispersed. We found that after 4 weeks, these filters are non-functioning. There's so much plant debris on them that they're basically useless. So now we are going to change them twice every cycle. And to do that, that will cost us close to $5,000. The carbon filters that you're requiring us to have, which we understand, we know they work. So far to date, we've spent $8,118.56 because you need a carbon filter, you need a fan, and you need a pre-filter. That's the whole kit. So when you first came out with this odor ordinance, you required us to do 10 air exchanges. So to get to those 10 air exchanges, that's the money we had to spend. To get to the 15 air exchanges that you're now requiring, we're going to have to spend an additional $2,537.05 to get to the 15 air exchanges. And we as growers are telling you that 15 isn't going to work, but it's still there. You're not changing it. Yearly costs for replacement to replace those fat filters, just the canisters, because the filters are still, the fans are still good. So you're just replacing the filters. The yearly cost to replace them are $5,632.66. But this doesn't account for the electrical that we may have to do, or the electric charge on our CMP bill in order to run these fans or to add outlets so that we can add these fans. That cost isn't in this at all because we don't know what that cost will be yet. So to continue this with the replacement for carbon filters, the neutralizing agents, our yearly cost will be $12,812.14. Remember, that's just my cost. That's not the cost on the other growers. So just one thing I want you to remember. First of all, we were never notified of a problem. And now we're expected to resolve it within a few months. No one is taking into consideration that it could be a neighbor that could be growing. I mean, we know of 2 people already on Pine Point Road that's growing in their house. And there are some houses that we have question about because we know what to look for. And we go by a house, we go, something fishy about that. But that's not me to tell you who it is. So since we now know that there's a problem, we have been proactive in reducing the odor. We really feel that we have reduced it. We're not saying that we've gotten rid of it, but we feel that we have taken the steps to reduce the odor. We're still not there. We still have work to do. All we ask is that you let us do our work. We've met with the other growers and we feel that, well, we notified them that we will be policing the outer areas for odor. We walk on the outside of the building all the time. And we know that if we walk around a building and we go to a certain section, we know exactly what unit it is or who's producing the odor. And we go to that tenant and we tell them, you need to do something. And we tell them the steps that they have to do in order to reduce that odor. We know what needs to be done and we are taking the steps to get there. All we ask is that you listen to us when we tell you that we're doing something, we're trying, And we ask you to be patient with us and give us the time to do what we need to do.
Thank you, Ms. Pelletier. Is there anyone online, Liam, that's waiting to comment? Is there anyone in-house? Mr. Hamel,
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question.
at the podium, please. Yes, so everyone at home can hear you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should have asked for this at the beginning, but could someone just take a few minutes to recap exactly, where we are in the process and what's been done? I know that the folks in the working group and, the good people who are on the council and, the help of Liam Gallagher have moved this along steadily. So, but could someone just kind of recap, what's been done, including the extension of the moratorium, and try to place this particular review of these recommendations in context of the process. And I'm assuming you're going to talk about what's next, but could somebody help us just sort of bring us to today from when we started on this? So I can't do it from my memory, sorry.
Thank you, Councilor Hamel. Liam, do you want to take a stab at remembering the timeline as the youngest brain among us?
Sure. Sure. So just just high level. So the council passed this ordinance back in 2020. Back in 2021, we did our first revision of it to include in better defining the odor mitigation standards in a way. After the concerns and complaints persisted, the town contracted with an odor consultant. He produced a report on sort of high level what mitigation equipment was in use based on his research and expertise, what would perhaps be more effective. And so we came out with a more generalized standard. After that, we did put into place a kind of what I think was characterized as an odor survey intended to measure the efficacy of those changes. And I think based on those results, odor issues and reports did persist over the next 2 years. I think I read that data into the record, I think back in January or February of this year. This really came back to a head when a Holly Street parcel was determined to be within the Pine Point overlay and therefore allowed to have marijuana establishments. And the abutters from the Holly Street and Bickford Street neighborhoods came back out, expressed continued concern and frustration with the odor that had been permeating their property boundaries. At that time, February 15th, the council enacted an emergency moratorium on all marijuana establishments in the town of Scarborough and prohibited any expansion of existing facilities. And at that time, staff kind of compiled with the support of the council, a working group to really refine and focus the conversation on ideally developing an understanding of kind of how we got here. We did have a work session with the odor consultant to better understand the challenges of odor generally, understand state statute, the ordinance history, and then have some discussions about what would be meaningful changes to the ordinance as it pertained to odor mitigation, as well as enforcement. And so, as you've already heard this evening, one member of the working group who does have a legal background and expertise in the industry did take a first turn at drafting much of the language that's within the ordinance. That has gone to town legal counsel for an initial review, and it's largely what's in your packet. We did make some revisions to that kind of first draft through the working group. But as you heard from the group, concerns around the timeline of enforcement and some other comments and questions about the specific language, some of which are oversights on my part. But that's really what's before you this evening. I think that there is call it an urgency behind moving this forward, to get more public feedback. And but also we believe that whether it's enforcement or mitigation, that will go to improving the situation down there. And so the sooner we can get some of those components in place, I think the more likely we'll, I think the more likely it will be that we'll start improving that situation overall. Just one other footnote, the initial moratorium was repealed and replaced on May 3rd with a more refined moratorium that just included marijuana establishments within the Pine Point overlay. So that's where we stand right now. It's a 90 days, so May 3rd through August 1st. Yeah.
Sure. Allison, do you want to get up on the microphone so they can hear you at home? Thanks.
So not in the ordinance or not mentioned here, and I don't know if this is gone away or not, but in the working group, what we talked about was once new performance standards were in place, then there would be a 9-week period in order to cover a growing season where residents would have to 3 times a day report into, a Google site that would be set up to say whether or not they smelled something. Then after that 9-week period, so again, if the tenants, and I hope you don't mind if I call you Shelley, Miss Pelletier, they say they had 30 days to come up to the new performance standards. So that adds another window of time. And I think we're well into September or October before we've really, arrived anywhere. And we still don't have, there still isn't a resolution. So has that gone away or?
Yeah, it is something that we talked about. And I think I sense some reluctance from a number of the members on the working group about further delaying enforcement, somehow delaying odor mitigation or changes to the ordinance. I still think, from my perspective, I still think there's value to not only measuring the efficacy of that, which is going to get measured one way or the other, whether there's an enforcement process that's underway or whether there's some sort of interim, delayed whatever that looks like. I think what we've consistently heard from the building owner is that getting information to her and her team down there will better allow them to understand where the origin might be. And so I still have an interest in doing that. It's actually gonna, and we've had some conversations in-house with our IT and GIS folks who develop some of the platforms for that. And I've already talked to them about instant kind of notifications when there's either a complaint or a report of odor. So we're still exploring that, Allison. It's not in the ordinance because I don't think that sort of process would be appropriate for it. But I know that some of the abutters have expressed a willingness to continue to participate in reporting whether, whether there's odor or not, and try to better understand what the challenges are there. Yep.
Thank you. So first, I'm glad I chose you to give that update. Thank you. You do have a great memory. You rattle off the dates. I was very impressed. The other thing I want to say is, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut off public discussion. Is there anyone else that need public discussion? Okay, I'm going to close public comment at this stage. I do want to say thank you to pretty much everyone in this room. Liam, not an easy position to be in. We asked her to be a moderator. To everyone that participated in the working group, I'm glad that you guys all came together with open minds and open ideas and did your best to try to find solutions. Councilor Seither and Councilor Katarina, you've put in amount of time as well with the working group and looking at this ordinance. So I appreciate everything that's gone on in all of these efforts. I truly do. And this is not going to be an easy subject. So here's what I would propose, and I don't know if other councilors here agree, but I think there is value, kind of taking a little bit of Liam's lead here. There is value in trying to progress a portion of this to the council for feedback. I do not think the full working ordinance or any change. I mean, we haven't even really crossed into a bigger, broader discussion regarding buffers or, impacts to other zones, not even just Pine Point, but what the impacts to other zones may be in town. So what I'd rather do here is just take this small little subset, see if we can get something in place, or I'm sorry, not something in place, even something to council for full council feedback so we can move enforcement measures forward, complaint registrations forward, while we take the time to really wrap our arms around the rest of the ordinance, which is also broad and encompassing. Does that sound? I think for today, I would like to just focus on the enforcement provision aspect of this. Yeah, so we have,
That's what I'm asking.
it would just be this subsection, like how do we get enforcement? How do we register complaints? That's really kind of what I think.
You're talking about section 7 only or 11? What are you talking about?
We have odor enforcement.
Section 7, section 11,
Yeah.
I think would be.
Yeah, because you can't enforce unless you know what you're enforcing.
Agreed. 7 and 11. They're just pulling it up. Yeah, license authority and procedure. And 11 is. Zoom right past it. Order observation and enforcement. So those are the two sections. I would suggest we try to hash out. And get at least counts, get something so the full council can also have this discussion.
With all, let's turn my son on, all due respect, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
That basically seems to be what this is and everything else in here is minor. Well,
I think we still have some zoning to discuss. Fees
Well-
and buffering and
well, the buffering is part of the enforcement. Is that 500 foot?
part of zoning as well. Whether or not we do something with the zoning ordinance.
Well, I'm not even talking about zoning. I'm only talking about what's in front of us.
Correct. This is why I'm saying I don't
So
I don't
yeah,
wanna-
that's why my question to you is,
want a kind of narrowed version going to full council for discussion.
right, so there's nothing in here about zoning. Did I miss something?
No, what I'm saying is anyone that's attending here today, thinking that we were gonna solve all of the
Oh, I see what you're saying. If they thought.
broader
Yeah,
marijuana
they're gonna
issues.
stick with this.
We're not done
Right.
dealing with this, but what we're saying is these two subsections, I think it's worthwhile to get in front, the more we delay here, and I'm not saying it's not worth taking more time on,
Yeah,
but there are opportunities for more time as it goes to council, first reading, feedback before we get, so there's more time, but these two subjects I feel are kind of important to get into place.
and I don't disagree with you, but I guess what I'm going at is I mean, we do need to change marijuana to cannabis
Can't,
under
yeah,
state law.
I think Jean Marie's point is if there's other like clerical things that we can bring forward to council to have them take action on,
Right.
let's just have them take action on changing the word marijuana to cannabis.
For
If
example.
it's that straightforward, absolutely. I want anyone else to know that we haven't even tackled zoning.
So you don't want, but you don't want us dealing with license fees at all?
I think that's worth sitting on for a little longer.
I mean, I don't disagree, but I just am trying to be clear on what you're parsing here.
I think we should sit on that one a little longer, because we have, limited amount of time here today.
Yeah, no. And I agree. I want to get at the nub of the matter, which is
Odor,
neighbors are concerned about odor. Nothing's been done about it. What are we gonna do?
correct.
So,
Now you got it. That's what I was trying to say. Thanks
That's
again.
all. I
Thanks
just,
for-
we would like to, your recommendation is that we hash through something that can go to council that's going to address the concerns of the residents
part E odor.
as soon as our May 17th
Correct.
council meeting.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So who wants to start? We've had some feedback. Liam, hi.
Would it be helpful just to give you just a high level overview of the intention behind it? And maybe flag some of the discussion points, or do you want to just
Go for it.
dive it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So just to circle back, I think maybe some of the administrative pieces, just cannabis, marijuana cannabis. But we'll put a pin in tiers of licensing establishments and fees. And we'll focus on odor mitigation, odor enforcement.
Period.
Okay, great. Yep. Sure.
Better be quick.
Never to believe a politician when they say they'll be brief, but I don't think I think what I'm hearing is there is concern even on the pieces that we're planning to potentially move forward, there probably needs to be some discussion, and most of this, much of this might take place with the council as well as what is going to happen here. But it's not clear. It's really not clear what the effect will be, even for the enforcement provisions that are proposed. I've heard, a lot of feedback from folks about that. Including the origin, including the source of those revisions. I mean, it's kind of highly unusual to have somebody who is who may actually be representing some of the folks that are operating to draft the proposals. So, I mean, I know that they're experts, but I'm not sure even the thing that seems like a simple change of changing the wording, to make sure that we're in compliance with state law and stop calling it marijuana or other words, and we call it cannabis. I'm not sure I'm not convinced there's no practical effect of that in terms of the ordinance and perhaps even our efforts to enforce. So as we go through this, I want to make sure that we just it's slow and steady, and we make sure that what we're proposing, we're confident is really going to have the effect that we intend. So anyway, that's.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Council Hamel. I would also just point out too, as a committee, we're making a recommendation, right? And at the end of the day, the full council can throw a recommendation right out the door and rewrite the whole thing on the spot. So we're really just trying to come to some conclusion, make a good advisory opinion, and get this back up in front of council for action. I mean, we need something to happen. So I don't want to be flippant or delayed or I'm sorry, not careful with what it is we're proposing, but I do believe that it is, I mean, we've passed 3 months on our moratorium already. We're into our second set of 3 months. Our working group has done a ton of work so far, and it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. So I think what our goal should be here today is let's get something that's good enough to have a healthy discussion on council level. That's what I'm after. And I think that's the fairest thing. Public is not going to be disengaged through that part of the process. This is just a recommendation. So I think I would encourage all the public and the owners to continue to stay engaged in this process and how this proceeds through the council process on the full council process.
Right. And to that, I mean, as the three of us as the ordinance, I mean, we can't do anything. It's not up to us. We just make recommendations. We start the process as we already have. So in order to get to council where action can be taken, this needs to be moved forward. And I agree with Mr. Chair that this should be moved forward sooner rather than later to at least let's get this odor issue addressed. Get that started. Then we can look at the other pieces of the puzzle. But to me, that if I'm incorrect, someone.
No,
correct
I
me,
agree with you.
that's
I
the
think
issue.
I think we're setting this up to be drawn out at full council and to come right back to ordinance if we do not break this into smaller chunks.
Right.
I just think we're setting ourselves up for a really long process if we don't break this down for council. And so my preference at this point would be to have Liam go over the changes as it relates to those two components and see if we can get some consensus at the committee level to make recommendations to the full council.
Yeah, I agree. There's an inflection point here on each topic. So odor mitigation, let's just start there. What are our inflection points for odor mitigation?
Great.
That we should have a quick discussion and kind of an up or down or modification process here.
So let me just, I'm not gonna go through it word, but the intention here is to obviously improve the standards for our odor mitigation equipment. And so the group had a lot of discussions about, and we heard from our odor mitigation consultant that, the air exchanges is a helpful piece there. I mean, it's how much air you're moving through, treating, filtering, does have, generally speaking, a positive impact on how much odor is actually has the ability to leave the room. That's, so the more air you treat, the better it is. So really what we tried to do here was be more prescriptive than the current ordinance and what rooms need to have this in. I think the prior version, which you can see the red line in, flagged, flower rooms, cure rooms, and any other room with high odor potential. This is intended to simply be more definitive in that. It retains the carbon media, filtration as the standard, while allowing for another technology should come up that's just as effective. And then it also just, this should have been probably known or understood, but goes the extra length to say, these things need to be on all the time. So again, that wasn't in the ordinance, but simply says you need to have this equipment running all the time. Speaks again, no window air conditioning units or window fans, again, for cultivation units or other ones with high odor potential. Windows must remain closed. And really maintenance records. So we talked about this need for filters to be changed on a regular basis. And we would like to have evidence of that that's actually happening. Some of the comments you heard during public comment are good suggestions, which we did at the working group talk, essentially kind of approve or recommend moving forward, which were oversights on my part. So there is the comment about reasonable measures and striking that line. So just as any and all measures, I think that there's a general agreement on that. And then also the carbon filters, again, having language that stipulates that needs to be replaced on an annual basis or 12 months. So again, that was an oversight on my part, which the working group did discuss. So, and then it also goes in and provides some specific guidelines around what what an odor mitigation plan really should include, in addition to floor plan, system design. Again, it's just much more prescriptive and defined than the current ordinance for what should be required as to be submitted with their application. So I think that beyond those other oversights that I noted and were mentioned in public comment, I think there was my read was that there's general support for these other pieces. It can't hurt. Is it going to solve the problem? We don't know. But it's certainly better than what's in place now and should only generate a more positive outcome. So that's kind of high level, an understanding of the odor mitigation changes.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, the only other one that I'd like to look at is section 11, odor observation and enforcement. Under paragraph 2, the odor complaints must be from at least 3 different households or businesses.
Let's do mitigation first, then we'll do.
Oh, okay,
enforcement
because
second.
I was gonna say that I can see making that 500 feet.
Yeah, let's just try to work
Sorry.
through mitigation, and then we'll get over to enforcement. Those are the
You
two
guys
things
are
we're gonna
being way too logical.
because there's a lot to sort through. So.
It is.
I have a quick question on mitigation.
Yeah.
It relates, it bleeds into enforcement, so I don't know if I should bite my tongue or not, but the record keeping and the 15 changes, this is a mitigation effort. And I see the section here that we have some means for enforcement. I think the 15, are we sure 15 changes work? We just heard how expensive they are. Are we sure, or is it just 15 was a bigger number than what we have and we're going to see if 15 works is my question.
I believe what we heard from the odor consultant and Jean Marie or April can correct me. I think there have been some industry folks who have said 8 to 10 air exchanges should be effective. Others have said north of 20.
Right.
And so again, there are other variables in there, how much byproduct or particles are being released, how clean your filters are, there are other components to it, but 15, I think, was an educated improvement on the current standard.
Okay. Sorry, other mitigation points that should be discussed by us?
Section 7A, subsection point number 5, other areas with high odor potential is subjective to me. I don't remember what the previous language was. If we did the room call outs because we thought the other language was too subjective, or whether we did the room call outs and then we added that last one because we wanted a catch-all. I can't remember the logic behind that.
So the existing language says, talks about the 10 air exchanges per hour in all flower rooms, cure rooms, trim rooms, or other areas with high odor potential.
Okay, so we added hallways adjacent to the mature
Mhm.
floor room.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's something the council could discuss
Yeah.
as a whole, you know, whether that's too subjective or not.
Okay, anything else on mitigation?
I didn't see any, of course, having sat through the working group, you know, it's like, I saw how this came together, so. No.
You got done. Really quick. You're getting a lot of leeway as a counselor.
Pay back for this, so, I was struck by what, the Pelletiers said in terms of the measures they've gone to and the costs, not only for them, but also the operators. I understand that. But when we're on this topic that April mentioned about the hallways, you know, the outside the grow rooms, outside the long list of the places where you want to have the carbon filters. I believe that they mentioned there were 3 holes in the building that made it so it's not airtight, and they fixed one and you still have 2 more to do or something like that. Is that what you said? You have 2 left to do. So anyway, I would just say that seems to me pretty important. So that should definitely be left in. And I think that's a continuing, I mean, I know the building a little bit. We rented space there, and I know that it's an older building, and they've gone to great lengths to, you know, bring it within control to this degree. But I think without really having, you know, a system that covers the whole building, it'll be very important to make sure that those things are not excluded, the remaining hole.
Thanks, Tom.
Can I answer / add to that? Just what came out of the
Yes.
working group in terms of things that I observed Shelley saying, and my perception is that she absolutely intends to address known problems. She's been incredibly accommodating with addressing things that have come up. I'm sure if she says that she intends to fix those 2 remaining holes, that she is going to fix those 2 remaining holes. There were other things that came out of the work group that Shelley knew she needed to address that aren't necessarily covered by the ordinance word for word. And then one of the other things that we talked about was with this ordinance and the nature of odor and how challenging this is, you know, Shelley is trying very hard to remedy the problem. But the part of the struggle that we had as a working group is that there's conflicting information. And so in some cases, we're hearing that putting a fan in a hallway actually draws the air out of certain rooms and creates worse of an odor problem. And so we're trying to strike a balance here between putting things into ordinance that are going to actually be solutions versus putting things into ordinance to see if, to try and see if they work and not exacerbate the problem. And so I'm cautious to change too many unknowns all at once. That's not good scientific practice to do, because we're going to have Shelley running all over that building, chasing her tail. And if she's making something worse, and now it's in ordinance that she has to do this, I would like the opportunity, you know, for some feedback that comes back to council and says, listen, I really feel strongly that placing the fans in this portion of the building is actually making things worse. And so I think other areas with high odor, I do see the subjectivity, and I understand, like, we don't want to have things codified that are going to limit Shelley's ability to mitigate the problem.
And I agree 100%. And I just want to remind everyone that the bottom line is that to stop the odor escaping from this property onto other people's properties.
Yeah,
That's the bottom line.
That's our prerogative. Yeah.
So.
But it wasn't black and white. There was no pushback from anybody in the work group that if we had a known solution that we weren't going to do it. Like that was not the case. It was just trying to balance what was going to be effective versus you know, what was maybe a suggestion that we could try, but people really just genuinely didn't know if it was gonna work.
Thank you. Is there anything else on the mitigation aspect of this? We're ready to move on to the fun one, which is enforcement, which I personally have a few points. So should we just go step by step here?
Yeah.
So 10.7, there was some question about standard proof. Preponderance of the evidence, I think, was brought up.
Right, I'm sorry.
That's the
where are
first
we?
section, it's under section 11. Odor observation and enforcement.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of questions that we should be answering here. One of them is if the code enforcement receives 7 or more written cannabis odor complaints, process should be corrected the problem. Okay. How do you feel about 7 or more written complaints? Because even if I'm one owner and it's on just my property, I still have a problem.
Yeah.
And you still have a violation. So I think this might go hand in hand with my next comment, which is enforcement. We need, and this might be a question for the town manager, but do we even have capacity to act in enforcement on complaints of this nature on a timely basis? Because I also agree with the sentiment that showing up 48 hours later is not a good indicator whether or not there has been a violation of the ordinance. And I also don't think that it's reasonable to suspect that we're going to send a police officer out there every time it happens. So guess my question for the town manager or whoever is there a way to supplement with, can you deputize a code enforcement officer for these purposes? Like, I don't know how we get better at it, but 48 hours seems too long to me of a time period to try to see if it really is an issue. I mean, I'm open to suggestions on this. I just don't know how reasonably do we react to a complaint to verify legitimacy.
Yeah, I think this ordinance very clearly establishes the code enforcement officer as the enforcement agent. Unlike other ordinances, it's often the police department or sometimes it's dual enforcement authority, but this is the CEO is clearly the enforcement agent. So we don't expect police officers will be enforcing this ordinance at all. And so part of that recognition is that these folks do go home at night and they're off on weekends and so that they're not able to respond immediately. And I wasn't part of the working group, so I'm probably out over my skis already on this, but I mean, having said that, the whole backdrop to this odor is a vexing thing to document, I'll say. And when it comes to enforcement, we need to have a system that is defensible for all parties involved. This does lay a process out. It does appear to be very complicated, but I think its intention is good, which is to lay a very fair and thorough process. So when we get to the point of enforcing and imposing fines, we have a process to fall back to point back to.
Are we addressing persistence? Because to me, it's the persistence of the odor. To me, it's one thing if an odor walks through and it's gone. It's another thing if it's, you know, a persistence. I mean,
Sure, and
is that?
And I've heard somebody say, you know, if you're driving down to Pine Point, you catch a whiff of it, is it
Right,
right? But if you're sitting in your backyard,
I know.
it's a different story, right? I mean, it's.
I mean, I think the last sentence that says complaints from the same household must be a minimum of 90 minutes apart speaks to the persistence of the
There
odor.
you go, yeah.
But I also. This is hard. There's so few residents on that street that are abutters. And so to limit their ability to report something. There's a lot of restrictions here.
Well, that's why I wanted to see the 500 feet increased. That was one reason.
So I guess
As one,
so we got a bunch of numbers here that we probably should be discussing, right? Is 7 the right number? Too many?
Right.
We need fewer that can, you know, file a process. We've got the number 3 different households. Is that, is 1 more than enough to have this be an issue? Is 500 feet reasonable? The 7 complaints
Yeah.
within a 2-day period, is that reasonable? The 7 reasonable? Is 2 days reasonable? Like, there's a lot of numbers here
right.
to send along, and I agree with Liam and Tom's thoughts here, where a defensible process is worthwhile. It's just,
Right.
how do we get to the right numbers? I guess, trying to make this work. So we have to take a step at this, council, mini council.
Or we can send it up to the whole council.
I-
As is,
I mean, I guess,
saying this is what we were,
do you want to see this hashed out? And, I mean,
yeah, I know, I hear you.
each one, I mean, each one's could be an hour-long debate. We'll never get through the
Exactly.
second sentence, so. So seven or more written complaints of odor. Is that too high or too low? I think that's too high.
Make it 5.
I mean,
I mean, I'm just throwing, this is.
so we want to kick, this is about putting code enforcement in place to go start doing their thing, right? Start with 5 and see where that goes.
Does a report to the app constitute a written complaint?
We're gonna be looking at that reporting procedure. Yeah, we think it will be much more, we're gonna be looking at that. But yes, there'll be a way online to fill out a complaint. They'll go right to code enforcement
Okay.
and trigger a notification.
And that's what that refers to.
Can I just make a few quick comments, maybe to echo some of Tom's? So yes, the intention behind building this out is to have something that's defensible, that takes into account more than just a single observation or a single occurrence. And you're right, Councillor McGee, that maybe these aren't the right numbers all the way across the board, but it is something that is trying to balance all of those components. It's not just a single household. It's not just a single complaint. It's, by having some spacing across, whether it's 2 days or a period of time, it's intended to really reflect that this isn't just a fleeting moment. I mean, there's continues to be an issue as documented by number of complaints, pervasiveness. That's that's what we're trying to get at. So that all of those things are what we're trying to achieve here.
Mhm. For what it's worth, if I called and I said, I smell it, I'm sitting on my deck and I smell this. And it's bothering me. I think having somebody come over and verify it is not a terrible idea. And I'm not saying it has to be staff. What if it was like, call my neighbor and be like, hey, you smell that too? Can you come over here? Like something that corroborates it is not a bad idea. Am I being crazy? Was it the car that would pass down the street that I'm smelling and not, there's a way to do it, but I don't think I also want to see somebody, I don't want to be, if I'm sitting on my deck, I don't want to have to like call up 5 of my closest friends to also be like, I can't, the smell's not gonna go away unless you all file something right now.
Well, and
Right, so-
I will say the neighborly relationships appear to be lovely on this street. But if I have a neighbor who doesn't agree with me, we're setting this system up to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, what if they just have a problem with my barking dog and so they refuse to file an odor complaint and now I can't get my odor complaint off the ground because I don't have 3 residents willing to make a complaint?
Can I ask a really basic question?
Mhm.
And maybe I've missed this somewhere in all of this. Have people called Shelley directly? Because that would be what I'd be doing. I'd be calling the owner of the business directly.
That came on.
In the past, you have? Okay. 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 Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Because that's always step number 1. I
Of course
know,
that's
this
all right.
is
I mean,
why it's,
there's
so
no-
you've got to have something, though. You do have to have some structure and it does have to be defensible.
So this is triggering code enforcement to go investigate, right? So 7 or more written cannabis complaints is when code enforcement will investigate. I think that's too high.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
I do. I think code enforcement should get out there before that many come in. So let's pick a number.
I said 5, but I'm open.
April? I think 3.
I was
You were gonna say 4.
gonna say 4.
Oh,
It's like, can we name
Hey,
this tune, right?
4 in
Like,
the middle. I say we send 4. Let's send 4 to council.
I
Just
said
send 4 to council.
arbitrary. Yeah.
Just try it 4. And if the
I
full
don't
council.
care.
wants-
I don't own my number. I just threw it out there.
Yeah, she got 5, I got 3, you got 4. We're going with 4, all right?
Okay.
7 going to 4. All right. And odor complaints must be from at least 3 different households or businesses that are within 500 feet.
So I think right off the bat, we're in agreement. Jean Marie and I at least are in agreement that that should say 750 feet.
At least.
One. Yeah, I mean, I guess why,
How many properties are within 500 feet?
Yeah, just includes it. It's just.
39. There are some addresses on Bickford Street that are within the 500 feet.
Okay.
Because the 500 feet is, I guess, 2 thoughts. One, 500 feet are standard for notifying abutters of things like licenses.
Okay,
Also, I think there's some thought about how close you are to where you believe the odor is coming from.
Sure.
The farther away you are, perhaps the less certain you are, I think is
Sure.
the thought.
I think that's valid.
so 750 is the recommendation?
Well, hold on. Now I have another clarifying question, which is, how many properties did you say are within
I
500
believe
feet?
Cody said there are 39 abutters.
Okay,
Again,
that's
that
significantly
includes-
more than I thought.
But I hate to say I'm throwing something out there for the people who came up to the podium and sent us emails and said this isn't enough. And I know I live on a house with 800 and something feet of frontage on Gorham Road, and to me, that's really not that long of a space when you stand there. I was doing that today, thinking about this exactly. You know, how is that distance? So to me.
I'll
I
also
see
say
an
this,
issue with 7.
I also don't like the idea of excluding somebody who lives at 600 feet away saying, I'm smelling it here and I can't, my complaint's not counting towards
Right.
this being an issue. I understand what you're saying though. Well,
Shelley, this is what
Shelley,
we've got
yeah.
the different numbers in
Right.
here.
So,
It's not just one person.
and
driving
I
by.
do appreciate your feedback. It does say households or businesses that are within this area. So it is confined to around the area. Doesn't say passing cars. It doesn't say, it just says households or businesses. So 750 is fine with me. 750. We have to do our work in the ordinance committee, guys. I've been pretty loose and I'm trying to be, I was gonna say, usually I'm not this loose with it all, but I've been trying to be accommodating, but. Mhm.
Says 1,000 feet from schools. And I know during the working group, I think it was Bree or Brianna, who mentioned having a birthday party for her young children.
Yeah.
And not being able to, so.
I think, so this is what I'll say is we've got to send something to council, and I think whatever we send to council, I think you should submit some written thoughts about what we've done
Yeah.
here. And that's what I would recommend the audience do at this stage. All right, 750 going once,
750.
April.
Sure.
Wow.
I mean,
The
I-
enthusiasm behind that.
Well, because I think, like I said, that 500 includes more properties than I thought it did. And I think that that's relevant information to let the council know just how many properties that is. I think the number of properties that are within 500 feet of the of snow canning is more relevant. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Like, that's a hard concrete number. I'm not sure that in my mind, I know exactly what 500 feet or 750 feet even is. And so if we can get if we can get the number of properties that are within 750 feet so that I can make an educated statement to the council that 500 feet from the property is this number of properties, but 750 feet is this number of
We can
properties.
do it on a
And
GIS.
then I'd be happy to weigh in on whether I think it should be 500 or 750.
Well, you can do that to full council.
Does it travel 500 feet?
Shelley, we got to do our work, and we're gonna ask that you're just submit what you're hearing in writing to the full council. We have to get through this stuff. So. Shelley, please. We know this isn't easy. Shelley, we know this is not easy for anyone. And we're clearly not gonna come up with the perfect answer for anyone in this room. We're gonna do our best. Next is suspected property line, I'm sorry, minimum of 7 complaints must be reported
How about the end of that
across a
during the
minimum
summer?
of 2 days. So
During a 7-day period, we want to talk about,
that's what we're on is so it says the minimum of 7 complaints, that should be changed to 4 now.
no, right at the end of the previous sentence. So in other words, order complaints from 3 different during a 7-day
Oh,
period.
during a 7-day
Do
period.
we want it 7-day or do we want it shorter? Do we want?
Yeah, right, I'm sorry. The odor location during a 7-day period. So if they have, right now, we're saying if there's more than 4 odor complaints within a 750-foot radius around this location within a 7-day period, code enforcement will go investigate. That's what we're
I just. wanted that
currently are
discussed.
saying. Correct. Which I'm okay with the 7-day period.
Yeah, I am too. I just thought, since it's a number, we should discuss it.
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
7-day.
I think it's fine, given the weekends and holidays. And whatever.
Okay. All right, 7-day stays for now. And then. So that's gonna change, minimum of 7, it's gonna be changed to 4. The minimum of 4 complaints must be reported across a minimum of 2 days within the 7-day period. And complaints from the same household must be a minimum 90 minutes apart. For what it's worth, the same household complaint aspect of this, I mean, I think. If I smell it on my property, I smell it on my property. I don't know why I need
Well, because you may
my
want.
partner to also verify it. You know,
This came up in the discussion,
Yeah.
because, the comment was that, people within the same household maybe have different schedules. And so if speaking to the 3 or more households, which I think at the time is 5 households, someone should be able to, if there's a spouse that is there at 8 o'clock in the morning, smells it, and then the other spouse returns home at 8 o'clock in the evening and they smell it, that should have the ability to count as 2 different complaints.
okay.
Again, that was also the rationale behind a higher.
And so the
number.
90 minutes is where you landed, as if
Yeah.
that time frame.
It's what's proposed. Yeah,
Okay.
that was my edit.
That's fine with me. I think 90 minutes speaks to the pervasiveness. So
Yeah.
if I smell something and I make a report and then my husband and I are still smelling it 2 hours later, oops,
I'm gonna make
then
another report.
we're gonna
with
make
a
another
different
report.
date stamp, different
Yeah.
time stamp.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm okay with that. Okay, so next we have within 48 hours of receiving the 7th, we'll change to 4. Cannabis odor complaint during the 7-day period, code enforcement shall investigate the properties that made the complaints to assess the situation. Code enforcement department will conduct 2 random inspections within the next 5 calendar days. How do we feel about that section there?
48 hours was a concession that, or a recommendation that down from 72.
Yep.
And that was pretty much what Brian thought was what he would have the bandwidth for enforcement.
Yep.
So that number did come from
Yep.
quite a bit of discussion.
And I guess this goes back to my question about staffing and deputizing. There was language I saw somewhere about getting proper training for. Is there the ability to help? Because I know, Brian, I mean, we're building 300 units a year in Scarborough. Code enforcement is doing a lot of work on a daily basis. Is there extra help that should be required for enforcement? And Brian, I'd actually invite you to just give us a couple thoughts. So, but as it relates to the 48 hours, I mean, reasonably, do you believe your department can investigate per the ordinance? And I understand that this was a compromise of some spot.
48 hours to me is a reasonable time frame. Doesn't mean that we won't get there in 2 hours. It doesn't mean that we won't get there in 6 hours, but 48 hours gives me the ability, depending on who's on vacation, who's already booked, what I'm doing, somebody will get there within 48 hours. Again, doesn't mean they won't get there faster. I just felt that that was a good outside number.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I just make one other comment,
Sure.
Nick? So one other change from the initial draft that the working group discussed was, I believe the original language had, we'll go out and investigate within whatever the period of time was, in the event it wasn't smelled or detected, it kind of throughout the complaints. And so this language suggests that there will be 2 subsequent inspections after the initial one, within that. So essentially within that next 7 days, there will be 3 visits by a code enforcement officer to the abutting properties to see if the odor is detected. And if it is, then it goes down the enforcement process. I think we had heard from the abutters that, or from the working group, that simply going out one time within 3 days, if they don't smell it, then it just kind of goes away. And
Sure.
I think, so that was the intention behind that next bit of language.
I'm comfortable with the way it reads currently, or at least to have that portion of it go to council the way it's written.
Mhm.
April? Okay. So preponderance of the evidence, as I mentioned again in here, is, I mean, I would assume that code enforcement is preponderance of evidence if they document it. Agreed, okay. Provisions about contacting the landlord, and then it says in writing conformance of the ordinance within 10 business days of receiving the verbal notice of violation. Can I ask verbal versus written, why a verbal here?
It's just, the majority of this language is based off of another municipality's odor process. And so verbal is probably quicker than reducing it to writing would be my thought. I'm not sure if, I'm seeing nods in the audience. So it's just a faster way to notify the building owner or the licensee that there's an issue and been a complaint that's been substantiated.
I gotta believe in writing is, for documentation's sakes, probably.
I'm sure that there will be written documentation of it. It's just simply picking up the phone, calling them, rather than reducing it to writing and mailing it, certified mail, which takes an additional time.
Any thoughts?
I don't have a problem with verbal.
I don't
notice.
either. Do you want to add something that speaks to additionally, the CEO will file a written?
I mean, it's talking about CO to whoever's violating it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, aren't we still holding largely the landlord also largely responsible for any infractions of their lessees?
The landlord's certainly involved throughout here.
Code enforcement shall contact the landlord of the property.
Right.
Yeah,
'Cause
I
I'm
see what you're
looking
saying.
down
Yeah,
further,
I didn't.
I think I'm struggling with. Okay, I'm sorry, and then right in the same, like right afterwards, it's in writing.
So the code enforcement officer would notify the landlord or licensee that there's an issue that's been, a complaint that's been substantiated. And then the obligation is within 10 days for the building owner or licensee to respond in writing, essentially saying they've mitigated or resolved the issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I guess for what it's worth, I'll leave this, my sentiment is to leave it as is for council review.
Yeah.
All right. Next section, it says if after 14-day period as described, cannabis odor complaints persist from the same households or businesses, code enforcement shall assemble cannabis odor panel to investigate the cannabis odor complaints. The odor panel shall include at least 3 of the following positions: assistant town manager, representative of the fire department, representative of the police department, zoning administrator, and a code enforcement officer. The licensee, if known, and the landlord must be notified the date and time when the odor panel will meet and be permitted to witness, not participate in the odor panel's investigation. The licensee and or landlord may send a representative to meet the odor panel on their behalf. All members of the odor panel must be present and shall investigate within 5 business days of receiving complaints. So you've got an army going in.
So context.
Okay.
So this largely reflects who will likely be the members of the marijuana inspection team as it stands now. We have a member from the fire department in the form of a deputy chief, police department, code enforcement officer, zoning administrator, and myself. The reason for 3 is certainly, based on that, you could probably take a vote if there's some dispute of the majority rules there. And 3 of 5 will hopefully open up greater flexibility to
respond quicker.
compile the team to be down there without needing everyone. So that was intended to give some flexibility there.
Okay, thank you for the context. Any thoughts on that? If after the 14, there's a 14 number in there, there's 5 business days, and then there's an odor panel. Thoughts on any of this? Let it go to council as
Yeah.
written? Yes? April, you look like you're thinking about saying something.
I don't know if what I'm thinking about saying is helpful, though. I just. My concern, and I hate raising concerns and then not having a proposed solution. And
Mhm.
so that would be why I would hesitate to say anything. But for me, and this came up at the working group in terms of, having a calendar drawn out for exactly how long this process could be drawn out if it's not effectively mitigated. I think Shelley would be the first to tell us, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's going to be so difficult to pin down whether or not a single odor complaint has been mitigated, and then 5 days later, a different source of odor is causing a complaint. I just don't know how we're ever going to get into a position where we will know for certain that the odor complaint that was reported, verified on Monday, which was verified by Brian within 48 hours, was reported to Shelley over the phone, and then she reported back in writing that it was mitigated, but all this time we've had 2 other reports come in. And so I just don't know, given the nature of this building and given the nature of what we are trying to do here, whether establishing a process where we may get overlapping or persistent reports. And what are we going to do to untangle those from one another? Because this assembling the team is a significant amount of staff effort and time. And I'm just not sure that they could ever be certain that the odor that they're responding to on Monday is separate from an odor complaint that comes in on Wednesday.
If I,
It's still, it's still related to the single property, correct? I guess my question would be like, you still want the odor to go away, right?
Yes.
Whether, and I view this as, I'm the owner of a property, I've got tenants in there, somebody's misbehaving, and maybe I'm trying to address it here and something else pops up. Either way, I still have an issue as the property owner of odors leaving my property. It's
Mhm.
still their responsibility to mitigate, right? Overall, shouldn't it be?
Yeah.
If you have irresponsible tenants, that's on you. That's,
So we're just saying, and this is fine. Honestly, that simplifies this, and maybe it would simplify this. If I didn't understand, maybe other people don't understand. That we're basically saying, if this property gets a complaint on Monday, this process starts on Monday. If she's still getting complaints the following Monday, Tuesday, we're calling that not resolved. We're calling Monday's problem not resolved.
Right.
That's my concern.
saying that Monday, it may have been resolved, they patched a hole and it's gone away. Now Tuesday, though, it's a different problem. Is that what you're worried about?
Yeah,
It's still a
and
problem Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
right, but in
Odor goes
terms
your
of,
way.
absolutely. But in terms of having due process, I'm trying to untangle it, Liam. In terms of having due process, if we have a violation that comes from the snow canning property on a Monday, and we go through the steps and people are still making reports, then we're still referring to those as unresolved from the date of the first report. And so any calls that come in that Brian has to go and verify, are they part of a case file or a report that is part of that Monday
So-
called?
I understand the question and I guess I need to give some more thought to it and expect, again, Brian Longstaff may have some thoughts on it as well. I understand the question that, let's say so whatever the number is, the frequency, the complaint is, that threshold's met. It's then verified by the code enforcement officer. That triggers the verbal notification and within 10 days, a written response from the landlord. In the event complaints come after that, then it's the odor panel. And then that requires an engineering report if that's then substantiated. I think your question is, so the first threshold is met, it starts off that whole process and then it's met again, and then it's met again, and then it's met again, and then and is it just this rolling period where you're in this process, this sort of progressive process? I think that's a fair question that maybe we can attempt to speak to. Something to the effect of, once sort of a property or licensee is within a complaint process, that process must resolve in some fact. I mean, I think ultimately it will kind of work. If there are complaints every single day, then it's at some point that process is going to trigger that next step in that first process, right?
And then anecdotally, we heard in the work group that there was a report of a problem. Shelley received the report. She went to her property. She figured out what the source of the odor was. She fixed the problem. The odor went away. If she's doing that, then this whole series of events that was triggered by that first call is no longer the source of the odor. And so I just don't know how we keep
I'll say
But
this.
that's when, how,
piling back to that initial verification though. Like if our code enforcement officer is verifying the odor as a result of a singular complaint and that odor is addressed, then how do we then link subsequent reports to this process?
well, it's indicative of a larger problem with the overall facility.
Yeah.
right?
Big problem.
Yeah. I'm not trying to overcomplicate it. I just don't see how we
I
can
appreciate-
possibly do. I just don't want to put something to council and have an ordinance in town that is not reasonable for Shelley to possibly ever, she's going to be chasing all of these reports. It sounds like a tremendous amount of staff time, but then it also, is putting quite a bit of burden on and a long timeline on the residents. And so I just want to make sure that we all have the same understanding that if this process is triggered by a singular event and then subsequent complaints come in, we are still following the timeline of that first initial report. Because if it resets every time and Shelley is addressing the problem and it resets every single time, then the panel of staff is never going to be called to the scene. But
Does
to your
3A
point,
and
Jean
B-
Marie, we have a persistent problem. So I
But does
just-
3A and B
2A.
below that?
2A and B.
No, 3. I'm going down to
Oh, you're
3.
you're down to 3
I'm
already?
going down to 3, and the reason I went down there is because it sort of, I think, sort of identifies that, because it talks about cannabis odor complaints persisting, blah, 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 and then it goes on and it talks about changes may include adding additional performance standards to licensee's local license. Could restrict the license, could take away the license. It goes down through whatever. And I would is Phil still here?
Bill is here.
Poor Phil. I mean, is this something that he can take a look at?
If I could, I just want to, and I appreciate, are you done? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not done.
Oh, keep going then.
Okay, thank you. No, is because this section 2 leads to section 3. And if I'm hearing April correctly, and correct me if I'm not, it's like, so you trigger something, you get this triggering incident and you're attempting to address it, or you think it's addressed, then you get another trigger. Then what becomes the timeline? And is there some way to make sure that this is written or constructed in such a way that it's not dragging on forever? That's like, oh my God, you get a trigger. Oh my God, you got another trigger. Well, we've got a problem here, Houston, that needs a bigger fix. And does that go right into 3? That's my question. Now I'm done.
So here's my general observation is I have concerns because of the process that's being outlined here. That you will have. One, you have a ton of opportunities to dispute whether or not something's going on from an original complaint or not.
Mhm.
I think we're overcomplicating is my simple way to say this.
Okay,
Okay, I think we're overcomplicating. I think if you got an odor panel and they start to cite an issue, if the action to move an odor panel into place and they're citing an infraction, I think it's okay, first infraction equals X, it's a
Right.
fine. If the odor panel reassembles on the property and monitor, 30-day
Bigger
monitoring,
trouble.
if there's another violation in that 30 days, here's a bigger trouble. By
Right.
the third time we get a
Right.
violation after another 30-day period, it's gotta come before somebody for licensing or revocation or something. I just feel like this is so overly complicated and could be disputed in a million different ways
That's why.
that there'll be no satisfaction to
Well, that's
anyone
why-
that's suffering through a problem.
That's why I want
Right.
Phil to look at it.
So
I know he already has, but
I
see if we
would-
can simplify it.
I would prefer much incredibly shorter set of what happens after this odor panel gets put into play. Like you
Phil sitting.
get odor panel, they come by 3 times in a month, and if it's an issue, then something more needs to happen. And I do also want to say that the owners of any property that engage
Right.
with this also deserve the time to remedy it. And there are specialized materials that take time to ship, and anyone that
Oh, I know.
had to try to buy something online from. If you're a contractor, I could tell you, I mean, I waited 8 weeks
Oh, I
for
know.
some simple plumbing stuff at one point, and. Not because I didn't want it in my hand and not because I didn't want
I
to fix it. So there's gotta be. There's gotta be a reasonable amount of time to give an owner that is addressing a problem to address it. There does.
Which is what 2 and A and B are trying
Correct.
to do.
I just
Essentially
worry-
say,
Yeah.
there's clearly an issue here. We need you need to get an expert to come in, tell us what the issue is, and then you have time to fix it.
Right, but I also don't want to see a 6-month process to address this. I think that's too much time.
Mhm.
I mean, that really is too much time to ask somebody to sit on their hands and lose an entire summer to an odor problem from their deck because the process itself is taking that long to play out. So I would just think it's got to be more succinct.
So do we want Phil to take a look at it, see if he can simplify something? I mean, he can't do
think-
it right this minute.
I think
but if
between
we-
Liam and Phil, can we get a smaller, shorter, clearer process on this? Is that a relative nod, Liam?
Do we want, Phil, are you okay? with
Is Phil
that?
there?
Yeah, I'm happy to help
Hey,
work
Phil.
with Liam on that. Yeah, if you can hear me.
Sure. Was that as clear as mud or did you kind of get the gist?
I think I have the gist. I think together, Liam and I together can take a look at this and maybe and try to come up with something more simplified.
Okay, so that being said, would we agree that 2AB and 3AB are gonna be part of this rework?
Yes. Yeah, because they fit together.
Okay. Agree? All right, so we will leave that for hopefully, what kind of time do you think you need on this, Liam? 2 weeks, week? Bill?
You have 8 hours.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, we probably need some time to look at it.
Okay, so now my follow-up question to this council is, as disappointing as this might be, is this really ready to send to full council?
Well, it depends on when they can get us this language. I mean, that language will have to go to council, not come back to us.
In any event, I don't see us, it could be on your agenda for May 17th.
I don't either. May
For
17th is
next
brutal.
week, right?
Right. So I think you're looking at the June 7th meeting.
So this is gonna come back June 7th, and then I would propose that we're also simultaneously working on the larger ordinance.
Yep.
In time for the June meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Liam,
I think I just say that again, the overarching urgency here, I think that there is an opportunity to still meet maybe the ultimate implementation deadline or approval deadline by compressing some other steps in the process. So I think there is that opportunity for council to still have something enacted before the end of June.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate that. more on enforcement. Is there anything else in the enforcement section that we need to discuss?
I think if we get this unraveled and simplified, that it'll make more sense.
With that, I think we're finished with marijuana. We have 15 minutes left of our meeting. LD 2003 is approximately 250 pages long. Miss Autumn, I hope you enjoyed the marijuana discussion. However, I do feel like we may have to move this till our next meeting, unfortunately.
Just want to remind the council, the committee, I should say, under state law, we do have a requirement to have our local ordinances comply with state law by July 1st. Having said that, I'm not aware that there's any active enforcement mechanism in place, and Autumn has gone to a lot of work to prepare this for your attention, so.
Autumn, is this something that, I mean, it is kind of the same as what we saw during first go around? It is simply pretty much what we did last time, right?
Do we need to take a vote though to move the marijuana stuff?
It's just gonna come back.
Oh, after she.
No, I mean, it's just gonna come back to our next ordinance meeting.
Okay.
I don't know what type of I don't know what type of resolution you want to it, just motion.
We're not setting anything.
It's
Okay,
going to be placed
I
on the
just
agenda for
wanted
next
to
time.
make it
Yeah,
clear,
yeah.
that's all.
Okay. So next item on today's agenda. LD 2003. Hi, Autumn.
Hi,
Thanks for being patient.
no problem. Thank you. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. You've seen most of this. There's just a few slides in here really to explain, and I think the memo tried to lay it out very explicitly what each section does and what it accomplishes and how it interacts with the proposed law. So LD 2003 went into effect July of last year. It is, as Tom mentioned, going to go into effect July 1 of this year. There are a couple of bills on the table right now to postpone it, but we can't be ensured that that's going to actually happen. The rulemaking is complete. And there are, if you'll go to the next slide, Liam. These are, at our last meeting, I gave you an overview of it and you asked me for some questions to answer. And rather than those, I gave you the assumptions that I made when drafting the ordinance. Basically took a very conservative approach, made sure that really, I would say a lot of our ordinances already met some of the requirements, especially for accessory dwelling units, but really took a conservative approach in making sure that each unit had its own lot size and took all of the limits, pushed it as far as we could to make it meet the intent of Scarborough's town ordinances, meet those. Also removed the potential for dual density bonuses where it was possible. So next slide. So the first section, and it's outlined in your memo, which zoning changes this one applies for. So this has to do with section 7C, residential density and affordable housing. So essentially, all of these words on the slide, we're adding affordable housing density bonus section, and we're removing the affordable fee in lieu option for this section. So this is all the background for the affordable housing portion. So go to the next slide, please. And this is just the effect on Scarborough. And it tells you what the density, and we took a look at this last time too, what the density would look like. This affordable housing allows 2.5 units, 2.5 times, thank you, for base density. But you have to have 51% designated deed restricted affordable or workforce housing to get that bonus. So there's one of the bigger things, there's some parking limitations that come out of this. But really, that's a whole new section that's included in your ordinance. Next slide. This one is the bulk of all of the words and all of the ordinance changes. It's the residential units up to 4. And this is still something Phil and I have gone back and forth and had some conversations about it. You'll notice that I combined some districts, so put all of your residential districts into a table format and sort of collapse those. And you'll see when you look at that, there's some things like we have 2 family, but single family up to 2 units. There's some redundancy, but what I wanted you to look at was exactly what we have in the books today, so you could make those decisions, not staff. And then the red lines are just simply to show you what would be required to meet the requirements. So all of those different districts, R2, R3, R4, 4A, those have been put together. The village residential districts were combined and done the same thing. And then the TVC districts, RPO, all the districts that have some changes required. They're pretty simple, but you'll see that accessory dwelling is now the use except for accessory units. You'll see that single family detached is no longer there. It's an single family unit. And then they're all subject to performance standards, and the performance standards fall back to the LD 2003 requirements. And those have to do with, you have an existing house, how many units you can add on a lot. If you have 2 existing homes, and there's some different scenarios, and that's what those relate to. The next section, this is again, just a recap of what was in the staff memo. The next slide is we saw this last time. This is just a comparison of all of our different districts and what we had to do to them. And then the next slide talks about accessory dwelling units. And again, we were in pretty good shape for this one. There's just a few things that needed to be updated. We need to remove the parking requirement for ADUs. There was a couple of zoning districts. If you allow single family home, you have to allow an ADU. So there were 3 districts that we had to go in and add that use. So that's part of the red lines too. The next slide. Again, you can see that those 3 that we had to add it to. There's one other one that we just discovered this week. Higgins Beach has a carriage house provision. And so we've got Brian had a great idea, actually. Instead of removing, we could reverse it.
Right.
So that'll have to come before you as well. It's just a really easy fix, I think. Other than that, that's it in a very 10-minute synopsis, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Autumn. And that we know you worked incredibly hard on this, and it was a lot of work. So we thank you.
It's well needed.
We do have opportunity for public comment on this item. If you're here and like to speak on this, please approach the podium. Anyone online? Okay, I will close public comment. This is, next steps is to go to council. First read and then a separate second read, Tom. So
The normal 3-step process: first read, public hearing, second read.
okay, so
It will be a
We'll-
singular action item, though, with
Correct.
multiple
Right.
parts.
we're gonna be sliding right in under the deadline unless the deadline changes. Is that
It's
correct?
gonna get
Yeah, more than likely, we'll probably still be in process. You won't have
Mhm.
accomplished second read, but I think that's a defensible position to be in, that we are well underway through the adoption process.
And if we don't pass this by July 1st, they take away our right to be a town. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're revoking our charter.
I can only imagine the level of compliance or lack thereof, frankly, statewide. You appreciate the level of complexity. We're blessed to have a professional planner. Many communities don't have that in-house skill.
And I can tell you from Maine Municipal Legislative Policy Committee, this has been one sore subject for many municipalities within the state. For that very reason, they don't have planning departments. They're like, great, but when?
Mhm.
So that's why I'm thinking that, I know there's a bill and I haven't checked up recently. It was still out there that was going to extend it for 1 year. That was kind of like, it was one for 2 years. But I'm almost willing to bet that it's gonna be extended 1 more year, but we might as well get it done. I mean, we've got it done, yeah.
Do I have a general sense that there's some consensus that this is ready to go to council for phase 1?
Yep.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to send this as presented to council.
So moved.
Second,
Discussion.
no, other than to just say thank you, and
Yeah.
thank you to Nick for hearing this tonight, so that we're not just kicking this one.
Yes.
to the
I didn't
next
want to
meeting.
kick it
So
down. I
know
just
you
didn't.
did it, and I know we both have baseball games to get to, so
Oh,
I really
well, excuse
appreciate
me.
My
that's,
team is rudderless right now. I mean, who knows if they're even standing in the right spot? No.
but and you know, in all seriousness, Autumn, thank you so much for making it so clear, and the PowerPoint slides that go along with it, just everything, you know, it really does bring it down to a level that makes me feel like, even though I only made it to page 57 without having my toddler sit on my lap, that that this is complete and I feel good about passing this to.
Yeah,
to
and
council.
I will tell you, Autumn was kind enough to spend almost 2 hours with me.
Yeah.
On a lot of this work, so. And we are very lucky. You're very talented and this was some really complicated stuff. And you did a really good job simplifying it and really getting to the point of what it is we were trying to
Yeah.
accomplish. Making sure that we had good protections in place based on where current consensus for council is on some of our overall goals for the year. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other discussion?
No.
All in favor? Okay, that's going to council. Well, you were right. We got it done and I'm surprised. I didn't know if we were gonna end up in like an hour-long debate on parking and our, RV zone
But I'll
somewhere.
tell you that we are gonna look at VRBOs in there with this coming
Yeah.
up, with this on,
Yeah.
but that's later, that's down the line.
All right, so let's make sure we get through this agenda. Next agenda items is item number 6. We have a list. Marijuana will be coming back. I have a couple other things, and you're right, short term needs to be on the radar, and
Yeah.
maybe we put that on as a primer. We have a primer discussion next meeting.
Sure.
Yeah, because you wanted
Yeah.
to, I personally wanted to follow up if you're gonna have ADUs allowed all over town, and I met with Paul Johnson, who was formerly on the town council, he's now Greater Portland Council of Governments. And he and I believe it's April's husband.
It is.
Are working on some sort of a computer program that shows towns exactly where these VRBOs and B&Bs and whatever else they're calling them are located. And I was shocked to find out how they're all over Scarborough. It's not just in the beach areas, so. I'm like, so, and I've got some inside stuff on what goes on there too from real estate, so. I'd like to see something done to
So I think.
licensing and
I
stuff.
think maybe
for those.
next meeting, we just start with what is it we want to start looking into, right?
Yep.
What areas of it? How does it work? Like, who do we need to bring in to the process?
Yeah.
And what information do we want to have in front of us before we start getting
Yep.
into any pen to
Licensing and
paper,
all
right?
that kind
Sure.
of stuff. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other topics that anyone has on top of mind for next ordinance?
Mm-mm.
Heck, no.
No? Okay. I think everyone here for their time and efforts, truly appreciate it. I know a lot went into this, everyone for coming to speak as well. So
Yes,
with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? All right, thank you.
Play ball.